Hello, and welcome to Inside the Researcher's Mindset, a webinar in partnership between TMRE and Wire. I'm Amanda Alvarez, the event director for TMRE, and I'll be your host for today. Before we get started, I'd love to go over some housekeeping items. While I know at this stage, most of you have experience with Zoom, I'd like to remind you that our webinar today is live, and all the speakers you're hearing from are ready to react and answer your questions. And they'd love to make it as fun, interactive, and valuable for you, the audience, as possible. So be sure to use your chat feature to send in your reactions, to share experiences with your fellow attendees and the panelists, and then use that Q&A function to send in your questions. We hope to cover some of the questions from the audience during today's webinar. Just a quick reminder that those of you who are part of this webinar will receive a special discount to attend TMRE that's taking place this November 15th through the 17th in Nashville. Looking forward to seeing everyone in person there. And without further ado, I'd love to go ahead and introduce Lisa Wilding Brown, Chief Research Officer for InnovateMR. Lisa, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda. I'm so thrilled to be here. We're really excited to take a deep dive into the findings of our latest study and really explore how the events of the last 15 plus months have shaped the outlook of research professionals worldwide. So, to start off first, I want to take a few moments to introduce our panelists. I have the great pleasure of calling them my colleagues both throughout this study and beyond. First, we have Will Leach, founder and CEO of MindState Group, an organization which helps marketing professionals grow their business using applied behavioral design. Will is also the best-selling author of Marketing to Mind States, a practical guide to applying behavioral design to research and marketing. Will is also a behavioral design instructor at SMU's Cox School of Business and Texas A&M's Human Behavior Lab. And if you know Will like I do, you know that he is a researcher that likes to stay busy. Will is also the founder and CEO of TriggerPoint, a behavioral science-based research firm headquartered in Dallas, Texas. Hello, Will, glad to have you. Next, we have Sequoyah Glenn, or aptly nicknamed DataBae. I absolutely love that nickname. I wish I could, thought of that first. Sequoyah is a data-driven marketer and media disruptor based in Atlanta, Georgia, and a newly minted client services director at Morning Consult. DataBae has been in the marketing industry for nearly 10 years, carving out her niche by becoming a researcher across various disciplines in our industry. A marketer at heart, she founded the Black Marketers Coalition in 2019 in an effort to connect Black marketers of various backgrounds to help them foster and grow relationships with one another and to create the table that so many Black marketers often seek. Sequoyah is passionate about multicultural businesses, and she began consulting nearly 7 years ago and recently launched 924 Cooperative, a multicultural marketing agency. Sequoyah is also can be found serving on a number of boards, including the Multicultural Insights Collective, Fuse ATL, the A Pledge, and Jacksonville University's Black Alumni Association, among many more. We also have with us today Melissa Valenzuela, Managing Director at The Setup, a boutique consulting firm that specializes in providing national and international HR consulting services for organizations that are anticipating hypergrowth or swift change. Melissa excels in helping organizations scale by lending very confident expertise and knowledge in the areas of HR infrastructure, employee benefits, retention strategies, compensation strategy, international employee expansion, compliance, and HR administration, to name just a few. Melissa has nearly 20 years of a progressive experience navigating the quickly evolving world of human resources and people management specific to the market research industry. And last, but certainly not least, we have my co-host, friend, and fellow Wire exec member, Lilah Raynor, founder and CEO of Logica Research. Lilah is driven to help organizations use research to improve people's lives and drive business growth. Logica Research excels in creating customized research solutions that spark brand engagement, launch products and services, and establish thought leadership programs and media coverage with Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, and even startups. Her team's insights have been published in the largest media outlets in the world, including the New York Times, the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, and USA Today. So we have an absolute powerhouse of thought leaders with us here today. I'm really excited to engage with them and hear from their unique perspectives. So let's take a look at the different participating organizations here. I'd like to give a very special thanks to Women in Research and TMRE for sponsoring this study, along with the many companies that helped along this journey. Logica Research has led the effort in terms of survey design and analysis. My firm, InnovateMR, hosted the survey and executed the reporting deliverables. G3 managed the various translations for the study, and our friends at Nuance performed the coding. Without all of these amazing agencies, we have not been able to conduct this important research, so many thanks to you all. I'd also like to extend our thanks to ESOMAR, the Insights Association, CRIC, MRS, Green Book, Insights of Color, Color of Research, the QRCA, the African American Marketing Association, and the Black Marketers Coalition for helping us promote the study across their networks. So before we get started, I'd like to also thank WIRE's corporate donors who continue to champion and advocate for this incredible organization. And for those listening in today, if you are not a member of WIRE, I would like to urge you to visit our website where you can learn all about the many benefits of this amazing network. It really has been truly life-changing for me, both personally and professionally. And I'd really like to encourage everyone listening in, women and men, to join us as we help to promote and advocate for greater diversity, equity, and inclusion in our industry. So let's just jump right into the background of our study. I'll go right into our methodology. We conducted an online quantitative survey that was optimized for both desktop and mobile. We fielded the research from June 18th to July 30th of this year. 475 researchers participated, representing various levels and job functions, and the study was translated in several languages and includes participants from 42 different countries. So who did we talk to? We fielded the study in several languages and leaned on organizations like ESOMAR to help promote the study. 65% of participants are from North America, 15% are from Europe, 2% from South America, 16% from Asia, and 2% from Africa. In terms of gender, we had 64% as female, 34% male, and 1% self-identified. From a generational lens, representing the lion's share, 47% of participants are millennials, 34% are Gen X, while 17% of participants are boomers, and just 2% are Gen Z. In terms of the industry composition, 35% of respondents are end clients, while the majority at 61% work at a supplier of market research services. And lastly, 58% of participants manage employees directly, while 36% are individual contributors. So next, I'll hand it over to Lilah, who's going to review the results, and we'll close out the webinar with a discussion with our panelists. Over to you, Lilah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lisa, and welcome everyone. I'm super excited about the panel today, and I know it's going to be a great discussion with all these amazing people. So I'm Lilah Raynor. I'm going to be talking to you about the findings from the study to set up that conversation. So first of all, we covered a lot of ground in the study, and today we're going to be focusing specifically on satisfaction and mobility in the industry. And we're going to start by taking a look at how satisfied researchers are. If you look on the left here, we have over 50% or 57% are very satisfied with their career, and that same percentage are satisfied with their employer. And we're going to be talking a bit about that alignment between employer satisfaction and career satisfaction. For those of you who conduct satisfaction research, or if you've looked at employee satisfaction results, these are pretty moderate. We would like to see these higher, and there's definitely room for improvement. So we're going to be talking about how do you improve those satisfaction scores, get greater alignment between career and employer satisfaction when the panel comes on board. So at the same time, we're seeing those satisfaction scores kind of moderate. We're also seeing that there's a lot of mobility in the industry right now, a lot of researchers in motion. So over a quarter, 26% have changed employers in the past year, and 1 in 5 are likely to switch in the next year. Lisa asked me a great question as we were preparing for this, are there generational differences? And you saw that the majority of our respondents are millennials or Gen Xers. And in fact, millennials are twice as likely to have switched their employer in the past year. They're also twice as likely to be tell us that they're switching again in the next year, or will be switching again. And there is some overlap. So just because an employee switched this past year doesn't mean they might not be looking for another opportunity. So I think we can anticipate some continued mobility in the industry. And we also know that the market is hot. Almost 2/3 of employers are recruiting, and over half are recruiting for full-time employees. So what does that mean when we start looking at digging into satisfaction and getting into what we can do as employers, as employees to increase retention and attract great employees? So of those who are satisfied with their employer, 80% or almost 80% are also satisfied with their career, and just 4% say they're likely to switch jobs. But the flip side is true. So for those people who aren't satisfied with their employer, 1 in 5 are satisfied with their career. They're also 10 times as likely to say that they could switch jobs in the next year. So one of the key areas that we're going to want to look at again is that alignment between career and employer satisfaction. So when we look at who's at most risk for leaving, those people who have less satisfaction, they tend to be people who are middle management, who have staff reporting to them. They are working more hours. They are more likely to be working in the research department. So, when you look at the suppliers and agency people who responded, those people who are working day to day on research projects, they're more risk for leaving. And then people who are from racially and ethnically diverse groups are also at higher risk. And we see that COVID had an impact on how employees are experiencing their employer. So those who are likely to move, their satisfaction with their employer decreased during the pandemic. Almost half of them say that their satisfaction decreased. So how employers handled this last 18 months and the experience that was created definitely had an impact on that mobility as well. So there were positive outcomes of COVID, and we asked our researchers to tell us what those were. And we're also seeing differences in the experience of those positive outcomes between those who are satisfied and those who aren't satisfied with their employer. So for those who had the experience of working for an employer who had a greater emphasis on empathy as a company, who had an ability to hire a diverse workforce, who have a greater understanding of the importance of childcare in school, and those who are focusing on decreasing inequalities in our society, they tended to have greater satisfaction. And those gaps are quite big. So definitely showing us room to improve there, what we need to do as managers and leaders of organizations. Similarly, when we look at culture and values related attributes, we also see big differences between employees who are satisfied with their employer and those who aren't. Some really big gaps here as well. What employees are looking for are open communication with their manager, access to senior leadership, conversations about setting goals and performance. So a lot of characteristics and qualities of an employer related to great communication. They also want alignment on value, understanding of employees' experience and lives outside of work, opportunities for career advancement, executive leadership that's in alignment with their core value, recognition of individual employee communication style, and a culture that is committed to having a social impact. And that's a theme that we're seeing here, is that greater emphasis on diversity and social impact as an organization. many of these attributes that are related to communication and value alignment and career opportunity are ones that we saw when we did a similar study with Wire several years ago in 2018. So key themes there that continue to need to be improved across the research industry. So looking ahead, what can we do as research firms, managers, and employees? Well, that's what this great panel is going to be talking about in just a minute. First of all, understanding employee needs. Second of all, identifying organizational gaps between what those employee needs are and what the needs are for the organization as a whole. Third, creating an action plan. And four, measuring success. So as Sequoyah said when we were talking about these results, preparing for the panel, this is basically the scientific method. And it's something that we should all, as researchers, be very familiar with and be able to do a great job executing on and improving. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Lisa, and the panelists to dig into these and help us understand what we need to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lilah. Yeah, Sequoyah has so much sage advice. And we should sort of call that out in the pre-session as, hello, the scientific method people. We're like, oh, right, that makes total sense. I'm so absolutely thrilled to be able to assemble this panel together. And I'm so curious to hear how you guys are feeling about what Lilah just presented. I'm going to start with you, Will. Why don't you share with me one key insight that Lilah just covered that really stands out to you most?
Yeah, I think to me, it was really the empathy gap. And what I mean by that is, so I think it was Saatchi who did this research a couple of years ago, and they said that there's this empathy gap between what customers desire and what companies deliver, right? And so there's a couple $100 billion worth of actual profits that are lost every year. And as marketing researchers, like that's literally what we try to do, is we try to figure out this empathy gap for companies with their customers. This actually showed me that there was this empathy gap between companies and employees. And frankly, it's probably a couple $100 billion loss on potential revenues and profits. And so to me, I always think of the world as our job as researchers is really to focus on how to make companies more profitable by selling products and services. Perhaps we should be also being more focused on our own employees, because those could be the most profitable things that we could be doing. So to me, the empathy gap was huge.
Yeah, no, well said. How about you, Sequoyah?
My biggest one, probably to no surprise for those that know me, is how little diverse groups were satisfied with their employer. It was 16%. I thought that was, for me, as someone with a lot of intersectionality, it didn't surprise me per se, but it did alarm me at how little that was. I recently saw a study for those that follow Hugh, which really focuses on the marketing advertising industry. And they found that Black and Hispanic employees felt 2 to 3 times less psychologically safe in their working environments. And I think that we are seeing that as research as well echoed in that big gap between those diverse groups that are satisfied. So that was one that, again, not necessarily like, oh, I wasn't expecting it, but I honestly thought it would be a little closer to at least a quarter. So 16% lets us know we have a lot of work to do within our industry.
A lot of work. Well said there, Sequoyah. And I know we're going to get into that a little bit more in future questions here. But Melissa, what are your thoughts? What stands out to you most?
To me, really what stood out the most there was the attrition rate. That 24-25% attrition rate is huge. If you're looking at national averages, it's more than double a national average. And in market research, it's really it's inching towards 3 times an annual rate. And so that, to me, if I were an owner, if I were a leader who's worked hard to build a team, that would keep me up at night, because these organizations or your team members are likely dealing with 2 things right now. They're dealing with employees that have 1 foot out of the door or genuinely curious to see what's out there. And then you're probably also dealing with open roles that you're looking to fill that are more challenging to fill today than they've probably ever been in your career. And so that statistic, coupled with what I know is a really aggressive hiring landscape, if I were a senior leader in any one of your teams, I'd be nervous.
Mhm. Yeah, an aggressive hiring landscape at some point feels almost like an understatement, because right now there is a lot of mobility. I'm seeing lots of jobs being posted, hearing about lots of recruiters knocking on doors, and so there's options. It is absolutely an employee market right now, and so I think it's forcing a lot of organizations to look internally and say, what do we need to do to improve? What do we need to do to attract and retain, amazing talent? And it's a challenge for sure. What stood out to me among many things was just the level of satisfaction was much lower. That top two box was much lower than what I had anticipated. Usually with top two box SAT scores, we're in the 80+ percentile, but we weren't even hitting 60%. What do you think, Sequoyah, are the primary drivers? I know you've touched on diversity and the, kind of diverse groups feeling very ostracized and left out of the equation, which I completely and wholeheartedly agree with. But what else do you think is driving that dissatisfaction? I imagine there's a lot of layers to it.
Oh, well, you want me to tell my story or someone else's? But seriously, there's a lot of things happening. So let's start with the world being on fire, right? Mm-hmm. And all of this emotion is coming out. We have economic downturn. We have the whole issue with racial injustices. We have, coronavirus. We have now the things what's happening in Afghanistan. We are in a heightened sense as human beings as a whole. And when you are kind of wide open, you see things a little different. It's kind of like, for those that have been in a really toxic relationship, when you're in it, it's kind of like, okay, I know it could be better. But when your friend that you actually listen to for the 10th time says, hey, sis, hey, guy, this isn't it. This is toxic. And here's the signs. You're now wide open and you start seeing those things. So with all this heightened sensitivity to all the things happening, a lot of, especially in the diverse categories and not just racial diversity, all kinds, right? You're wide open to, this isn't necessarily a good place for me. And that was my personal story as well. With that, so you have this heightened sense of where we are, where you are, how you're being valued. But now people are also talking about it. You have so many groups, my group, Black Marketers Coalition, Wire, you have Hue, all these different groups that are now collecting data and actually saying, okay, now we see it's an issue. Now we understand, because these issues aren't necessarily new. They're just being exposed and accepted, right? So now it's, okay, let's put some dollars behind it. Let's do some research and data. So for me and my journey, learning from other insights groups that I was literally being paid $100,000 less than what was on par for the research industry, my spidey senses went up. And I'm like, holy moly, I did not know that's how bad my situation was just like a bad relationship. I did not understand. So when I learned that, because the pandemic, we now have trainings that are accessible, not only through the internet, but also paid. When I make $100,000 less, I can't pay for $500 conferences, but the pandemic opened up free trainings, free certifications, groups like Hire Black that said, hey, here's how you negotiate. And my knowledge of my situation has improved, but so does my price tag. The more I learn, the more I can demand. So when we look at our data and you see that it is an employee market, and you see there's 3 times as many job openings than there are people actually looking at it, looking for them. Aha, I can raise my chip. And now I can actually speak up and say, I am unsatisfied, not just because of the feeling, but because of that tangible data that gets people talking. So it's kind of a long answer to a short question, but you kind of go with emotion of self and that awareness, understanding by leveraging data in a more offensive way, not just defensive, but just, hey, here's what I saw. And also understanding now you can start that LLC and get that business. You can go solo. You only really need one client. You can team up with folks like the Insights Collective, IIC, all these different groups, and freelance, and literally make, some of us could, and like I did, made my salary back in a short few months by doing it solo until I found a group that valued me exactly where I am and exactly where I need to be for the industry. So that's pretty much my take on it.
Wow, there is so much to unpack with what you just said. I mean, first of all, we've known each other for about a year now. We were introduced through a mutual contact of ours, and so I've been watching your journey. From the time that you left your previous organization, you were consulting as a sole proprietor, and now landing your new job at Morning Consult, and just watching you expand and build your personal brand, right? You were noisy, you were out there, you had perspective, you were putting out lots of commentary on social media, your amazing lunch and learns with the coalition. I mean, I feel like you're a poster child for how to really elevate your career and demonstrate the value that you bring to the table and really expand your personal brand. I don't see a lot of people doing that in this space. I think it's kind of a quiet space in that way. There's some typical people that are involved in thought leadership and being very proactive, but I see so many other folks on the sidelines. And so I think you are a great case study, Sequoyah, for what to do and how to let your voice be heard. So I'm absolutely giving you major props. I think you are a great role model for so many people. So lots to unpack there. That's I'm going to be thinking about what you just said there for a long time, but I want to move over to Will. Now, Will, I think Sequoyah has touched on the fact that we are complex creatures. We got a lot of stuff happening in our heads, in our families, personal, professional. I think there's a lot of introspection that's going on that COVID and the lockdown and the pandemic have really been an impetus for, and people are really taking stock. Am I happy? Yes or no? Somewhere in between. Do I like where I work, or should I make a move? What can employers be doing? As someone that, like you've worked at large organizations like PepsiCo, now you're your own sole proprietor owning 2 different businesses. What should employers be doing to really keep the talent that they have and then attract new talent and really be the organization of choice?
Yeah, to me, I think it's no different than what we encourage our clients to do, which is deep empathy is the #1 point of differentiation you have. I do not care what company you are, deep empathy. It's your internal inside point of differentiation, and it's your external. And guys, I do not mean superficial empathy. I do not mean let's get in the feet or in the shoes of our employees or our customers. That is the bare minimum. I mean psychological empathy, meaning that science-based empathy to understand how to change hearts and minds. And behavioral science has so much work in this space. If you guys know Brené Brown, she's done amazing work in this space. Desi and Ryan, they've done amazing work in helping build employee engagement and happiness. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of that stuff in just a minute. I think where we run into issues is it's this idea that we believe that if we just have great company values and we stand by our values, then employees will be happy. I'm not a big believer in that. I believe that people follow people with great values, not companies with great values. People follow leaders who are transparent and who are empathetic and who are inspirational. So you may be asking at this point, well, then how do I bring that into my company? It's actually very scientifically studied. It's in literature. The first thing you got to do, and this would come from Brené Brown, right, would be you as a leader, if you want to create an engaging environment for your employees, you need to show vulnerability. And that means transparency of your true feelings, your true fears, and your real stories. So I think sometimes, and I come from a Gen X military family where I was always brought to not show feelings. I was brought up not to show feelings. And it was reinforced in the military. In today's world, that is not okay. Especially in COVID. Do you remember, I learned so much more about my clients because of what I saw behind them, because all of a sudden I saw their true selves. I saw a senior vice president at PepsiCo who had a Black Flag poster behind him. So he went to a Black Flag concert back in the 80s. He knew him so well that he had a Black Flag. If you don't know Black Flag, it's a hardcore punk band. And I was like, holy cow, he knows Henry Rollins. COVID made being vulnerable and open not only acceptable, but damn well reliable. Like, you have to show this. So first, if you're a leader, you sure as heck better start doing this. Be real with your employees, because your employees are scared and you are scared. We all have these vulnerabilities. Secondly, when you create a culture where leaders are showing fears, vulnerability, transparency. Then the next thing what you want to do is actually ask and have discovery sessions with your employees to ask them, what are they looking for out of their career? It is not going to be your company values, individual conversations. And we do this in behavioral science research all the time. You guys know how to do this. What do? You ask people, what are the top 3 to 5 things you're looking for out of your career? Let them list those things out. Those are nothing more than functional goals. They'll say things like more money, more time off, ability to grow. Awesome. That's great. Now you should be doing what's called laddering. What you do is laddering. You say, well, why are those collectively things important to you? And they'll come up with an answer and say, so then why is that important to you? And you guys know how to do this. It's that conversation, that second ladder is where you're going to understand what drives your employees from a motivational perspective. Why that matters is this. Right now, the big thing, Lisa, is a lot of companies out there saying, we're going to give flex time. So we're going to allow people to work from home. But if you have conversations with your employees and you find out that belonging, which is a core human motivation, the desire to build relationships and be a part of something bigger than ourselves, you can actually be hurting your company by telling people, go work alone. There's other ones like around achievement. So if people desire achievement, well, now you can start thinking about more reviews because people who desire greater success want to know that they're on the right path. And it means more than one conversation a year. Mm-hmm. Or maybe if it's they desire control, now you provide flex time, right? But you'll never know that unless you have these conversations. So companies make these world kind of policies like we're going to give everybody flex time. That may be awesome for some, and it may actually drive some of your best people out. And you'll never know unless you have these conversations. And then the third thing is, now that you know your employees' needs, go figure out a way to facilitate them to reach their aspirational goals. And that may actually mean, guys, you being able to step up and say, this is not the organization for you, but I'm going to help you find an organization because we have all these, I'm looking over the chat function, we have all these organizations that can help people find the great career that they want. Help them do that. And I know you may think, why would I give away my best people? Because if that person, if the organization sees you giving up that person and finding them a better place, 2 things are going to happen. 1, every other employee goes, they care about us as individuals. And that person who you helped is going to tell the world about what a great program or a great company you're at. So anyways, just based on the scientific method, that's the way to build engaging environments that I believe is going to help retain talent and bring in some of the best.
Yeah, no, I love it, Will. I think you're spot on. I think it's very common for a lot of employers to just sort of indoctrinate these large global policies, and they're forgetting the fact that these are people with individual needs and motivations. And just like in research, each survey participant is unique and special and has a perspective, and employees are no different. And I think it is really about having that humanity, that vulnerability. And I do believe that COVID has helped to really drive that. You know, we're seeing each other's backgrounds. You can see my, my treadmill that's covered in dust and then behind that is just a day bed, but I have this divider up here, but my background does not look as good as yours, Will. Like, oh my God, I mean, you staged that. You must have had some help, certainly.
I'm in the world of behavioral science. I know exactly what I'm doing behind me. But you know, Lisa, so I can remember this. I was at PepsiCo and I was brought up on stage for an award. And as great as that was almost, I wouldn't use the word devastating, but that was the wrong way to show you appreciate, because I'm actually relatively introverted. And being up on stage, not talking about work I did, but to be celebrated, it caused actually a lot of anxiety when they did it hey, let's bring Will up on stage in front of 200 people. I have to prepare myself for it. My boss did not mean to do anything wrong. She just didn't have empathy of who I was as an individual who did not want to be up on stage. And if we knew that about each other, we would treat each other a little bit differently, knowing these fears that we have, as opposed to blanket policies. Hey, if somebody did good, put them up on stage and celebrate them. That was the wrong way to celebrate me.
That's interesting. I do know that about you. You are a very humble guy. So Melissa, obviously you and I have worked together for a number of years. If you guys aren't familiar with Melissa's consulting firm, The Setup, I highly recommend you get to know her. It's unusual, I think, to find people that work in HR that are so intimately familiar with market research as an industry, and you are both of those things, and I love that about you. So you've obviously consulted with a number of different organizations, large and small, helping them to really improve the way that they engage their employees, as well as incoming candidates. I mean, just kind of piggybacking off of what Sequoyah and Will have had to say, what are your thoughts on like what organizations can be doing proactively? You've been giving me a lot of great advice through the years, so I know you've got something to share here.
Yeah, and thank you, Sequoyah, and Will, for that. I agree with everything that you've said, and empathy, I think, is at the core of everything. And Will, I think what you're talking about is really kind of a long-term commitment to understanding your team and understanding what's going to make them tick today and in the long term. But I'd also encourage everybody on this call to think of the more immediate short term and what people are feeling today in terms of stress with COVID, fatigue, and just kind of the world that we're in, and what people are really requiring in the immediate from their employers, whether that's flexibility, whether it's more communication, whatever they need today outside of just the broader, most important big picture. I think a lot of employees have immediate needs that aren't being addressed now. And so I'd encourage you to really talk to your team about what that is. And that can be through a survey, it can be through skip levels, it can be through manager one-on-ones with those team members, but really coming away with what's important to the individuals in my team today. How am I making their life better today? How am I making it more convenient, easier in this world of chaos? You mentioned it, Sequoyah, right? We have global warming, we have war, we have COVID, we have racial disparity. We have so much going around us now. So how are we addressing those immediate needs now? And that's something that I think is really important. For sure, we're planning for the future, and you want to support whatever it is that employees, especially fantastic employees, have in terms of their long-term career growth. But I'd really encourage you all to, again, really, really explore what's missing now. Because that's, in my opinion, the now is really what's making people think about leaving. And whether that's, kind of an unsupportive manager in this weird time, whether those are inflexible hours in this weird time, whatever that is, I think that those irritants are now the tipping point to getting people to look for something else, as are just the recruiters that are knocking on people's door, people like me, that are going, hey, Sequoyah, you have an amazing background. And guess what? I have an amazing opportunity. And let's talk about that. And what's actually missing today for you? Is it the long-term career path? Because we can talk about that. But I have a feeling that it's probably things that I can get you now. I have a feeling that it's probably more surrounded around money, bonus potential, flexibility, where you want to work, when you want to work, how you want to communicate. And so I think that there's a lot of immediate impact that as an employer you can make to appease your team now. It's just really figuring that out.
Mm-hmm. You make a strong pitch. I feel like you were just pitching Sequoyah there. I was like,
wait a minute, now you're speaking. But no, that's real. And there was a meme, and it was about LinkedIn recruiters and how they are now, and the Kim Kardashian leaning across the bush, and just how recruiters, it was the funniest meme, and how recruiters are starting to get more and more creative and looking beyond the traditional perks. 10 years ago, the perk was having PTO, right? And now it's having unlimited PTO, and then it's evolved into, well, you're just flexible all around, right? And so I think to Melissa's point, the ones that get it are starting to think more creatively on those things that can get you here. And besides, if it's not that tangible, here's your salary, what things culturally, I've seen that come up quite a bit in my own recent journey. And for those that have interviewed with Google, for example, one of their key things is talking about psychological safety, talking about culture, and not just are you a culture fit, but are you willing to contribute to the culture and vice versa, right? So Melissa, I think you're spot on, and I could listen to you talk about that all day long, seriously.
Well,
Careful. Who do you work for now?
I'm kidding. My boss is on the call.
I'm kidding.
She's building her virtual Rolodex. Oh my God, I love it, Melissa. It's interesting. I feel like there's definitely, if I think about the organizations in our industry now, leadership roles have a tendency to skew older. And I think about my own generation. I'm a Gen Xer, and we were just talking about this before we jumped on. And I think back to when I first started working, I was happy to get like free coffee and free pop. That's what we say in Western New York is pop. It's not soda. And I guess my standards were really low. Okay. They're really low. And fast forward 20 years, it's a different ball game, y'all. Like, isn't it? It's the expectations that people have, the things that employers should be providing to employees. It's a different landscape. And so I would just encourage, folks out there to think about, how things have changed, how things have evolved. A lot of organizations will just have, say, one review session each year, and then like managers kind of go off and do their thing, and the employees go off and do their thing. And there's not these sort of more routine, frequent check-ins to talk about you, the employee. And I think that that's really, really critical. It's something that, Melissa, you've always recommended to me, is like, don't just make your review season once a year. It really needs to be an ongoing dialogue that you have, and you need to really demonstrate that you care. I mean, we're all humans at the end of the day. We should all be caring and demonstrating that empathy. So
you touched on something really importantly, so I'm just going to interrupt. I think a lot of us that did grow up with a free coffee and went, free coffee. And I don't want to speak for you, but I think a lot of us take pride in that, weirdly, oddly.
Yeah.
And because we grew up in that and excelled, and hey, we had free coffee, and now you want A, B, and C, and D, and you've been here for 2 seconds. No.
Yeah.
And I really encourage all of us as leaders to evolve and let go of how we came up and how we grew up, because it has nothing to do with today. And it has nothing to do with today's work ethic or our viewpoint on whether or not there is work ethic there. Of course there is. When I hear people talk about, well, they should be happy because they have vacation, or they should be happy because they have a job. To me, it sounds like, I mean, I just think of like my mother talking about how music sucks now, and how in her generation, music was great. And I feel like that now when I listen to the radio, and I'm like, oh man, I don't want to become that person. I want to understand the nuances of today and what's going to make people tick today. And I want to embrace that. And we as leaders, I think, should embrace that. And so I think that's a really good point. And just managers being of a different generation and not always genuinely embracing what's next. And in not doing so, I think that the organization in itself loses on a lot of opportunity and a lot of talent, and really nurturing people that will do phenomenally well because, they listen to shitty music, basically. Pardon my my drop there. But if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. I agree 100%. I think there is a manager profile out there that says, I had it really tough growing up in this industry. I didn't get all these free snacks and extra perks and, unlimited PTO, and therefore the future generation shouldn't have those same, those types of opportunities. You should kind of go through it the way I grew up. And I just think it's a really short-sighted, antiquated way to think. And it's not rooted in reality. That is not the reality that we operate in now. And so you got to get with the times. So I totally agree, but I still think the music from the 80s is the best. I do love Dua Lipa though. She's great. I'm really into her lately. So Melissa, I want to ask you, because we were talking on Monday and getting prepped for this webinar, and you had said something that I thought was really interesting. It's just, how do you manage the disparity that exists for people that came to a company before the pandemic? And now you've got this onslaught of new talent that's coming in during a pandemic. It's a very different experience. And there can be all sorts of issues around disparity in terms of even pay, for example, right? It's an employee market. It's a hot market. There's recruiters like you that are knocking on the door, making that mega pitch that you just Sequoyah. And so ideally, people are going to be hired at a higher rate than those historically. So there's a lot of nuance and challenges that employers need to work through to balance that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And I'm seeing that in real time. I'm seeing employers that are jumping through hoops to get new talent. And hey, that's what the market requires. So that's what employers will do. but then they have existing talent who may or may not be a squeaky wheel and is definitely not the shiny new employee. And those people will very quickly understand kind of what's happening in terms of that disparity. I mean, people talk in organizations, or whether people are working from home or not, there is still that water cooler conversation. And so there is a disparity there, typically in compensation, or typically around benefits, or even flexibility. And so, I mean, in my opinion, it's a very simple solve. You have to right size everybody within an organization. And if it's not everybody, then it's definitely your top to middle tier performers, people that if they left tomorrow, you'd be choked to see them go, not just because of their contribution, but now the cost of refilling that position in time and money and energy and retraining and all of those things. And so I encourage everybody on this call to really have a solid idea of the benchmark for your team in terms of compensation and benefits today, not what it was 6 months ago, not what it was 12 months ago, but go out there, buy data, find data, go to Radford and understand what people in your industry are making now. And look at where your team is in comparison to that. What percentile they're living in, and whether or not you're comfortable knowing that perhaps in this scenario, your key players are maybe in the 50th percentile, but you've just hired somebody else. It's maybe not even a key player at the 70th percentile. So what does that mean for internal equity? And what does that mean for that person who's on your team now, being called again by somebody like me in this market? And so I can understand the hesitation of not wanting maybe to do that, because maybe this is temporary, maybe this, and I mean, ultimately it at some point will level out. But I think that taking action today that talks to what's going on now is going to be key in order to protect yourself against this great resignation that's literally happening across every single industry. And so I think you have to be smart. I think you have to be proactive. I think you have to take action. And you do that by understanding what's in the market, what's going on in the marketplace today. And you're seeing it in real time, because hopefully you're hiring people in similar roles and other people in your organization, and you're seeing what that is. But you can also go out there and buy data. You can go out there and find information that feels tangible and real and make an assessment and move forward. I mean, that to me is a very kind of direct, linear action plan.
Using data to make informed decisions. Imagine that, you guys. We have to eat our own dog food, right? We're researchers. That's what we live and die by, is data. And it's amazing in terms of how organizations are being conducted. They're not always looking at the data or using secondary resources to help really evaluate the landscape and how it's changing. So I think that is a great point. So there's a couple of questions. I know I had some more for you guys, but I want to just address some of the questions that are coming in from the chat. So I have one here. I have a major job title envy. Feel like it's holding me back internally and externally. I have 9 years of experience, but have never had the word senior or manager in my title. How can I advocate to my current boss for a title change without seeming super narcissistic and shallow? Or am I shallow and narcissistic? So I don't know who came up with that. Amanda forwarded that to me. So thank you for that question. Who wants to take that one? That's a great question. Sequoyah, give it to us.
I want to take this one. So first, thanks for asking this question. This is like my favorite. So I also write resumes for people, and I get this all the time. For one, change your resume. If you are looking out, change it to what those responsibilities are, is literally my biggest thing. And when you do that, look up what your title should be, not just by feeling, because we get into that where it's like, I feel like I should be at this. Look in your organization at what you think that title should look like, but most importantly, look outside of your organization. I personally have found in Insights, because there's so many boutique groups, but then there's a few big groups, those titles change based on who you work for, essentially. So you want to find some happy medium of what that looks like internally, but then what does that look like out externally? So if you don't get your way, essentially, you're already prepared, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Resume is all the way cleaned up and you can go talk to the Melissas of the world. So that's one. The other part is for those that may be like, okay, well, I really do want to stay at this job and I just really just want this title change. For me, what I did was I found out what made the organization, that audience tick, be it, is it revenue implications? Is it growth? Is it perception? Some places are very PR heavy, right? Or very, what does that look like to people? Quite frankly, depending on who you are, this can be prime season for you. Diverse people, it's prime time where you can just say what you need to say respectfully, but back it up with the actual data that makes your organization tick. So if you're in marketing and you know that, for example, with my own story, I know that we are losing business multiculturally because we don't have the right representation. I'm going to look up, what does that mean for my title? Can I now switch to being a specialist in multicultural research? Can I now go get a certification, or I already have one that can give me a level up? You really kind of got to leverage the cards that you have and look internally, externally, and present the data that makes sense. Typically, and I'm sure Melissa and Will, they're more senior than me, so they may have a different experience. But in mine, coming from more of the marketing and media group, it's all about revenue and sales. And if I'm not happy and I'm not showing as being a decision maker by title, because I was a coordinator for 4 years and I had a master's degree. I could not get my title changed. I was an analyst for another 4 years with a master's degree and certs and could not get my title changed. But what happens is when that business starts getting interrupted because they're trying to figure out, well, Sequoyah is making research decisions, but she has to go through somewhere else. A lot of these customers are starting to ask questions, and that confusion you can use to your benefit and use as a leveraging chip. Here's the data I know that I've had. Another piece of advice, look at that job you think you should have, put your scorecard up against that job scorecard, and highlight every single thing you do that is in that higher title scorecard that is not in yours, and present that data. If you have the data and they still don't want it, you are going to have to look within yourself. Is this a place that truly values me? F everybody else, me, because everybody else isn't going to pay your bills. Is this an organization that truly values me? What is that feedback they gave me in that conversation? And you're going to have to make a decision. For me, that decision was to leave, and to leave without a job. That's something you're going to have to be real with yourself, your financial advisor, spiritual advisor, and who you're responsible for. But go into that meeting knowing you may not get the answer. And if you don't get that answer of that title change, are you ready to churn out, and in what ways? And then what can that look like as far as your career trajectory would be some of my points of advice for sure.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I think you talk about, leaning in and taking a risk. It's interesting to me. It seems like a lot of us on the call, no problem negotiating on behalf of our company. But I think it's uncomfortable for a lot of people. The vast majority of people have trouble negotiating when it comes to themselves, right? And that can be very difficult.
And I tell people, and Lisa, you make a great point, because some of my clients' resumes, they're like, well, I'm uncomfortable. And I'm like, okay, listen, I'm gonna keep it real. Is it more uncomfortable to come home and your lights are off because you've been scrimping up your money that you are barely making? Or is it more uncomfortable to sit down and advocate for yourself? Mm-hmm. Some people will still not want to do it. And that's fair. I don't identify as that, so I can't really speak there. But you really have to ask yourself those same hard questions you're asking your companies. Ask yourself and go in with that mindset, almost like a dichotomous key. If this doesn't work, then what are the options? And make sure you sit in that and you stand in that. And in my experience with other friends that have done this, a lot of them, they'll go get another offer and they really don't want it. But they'll say, look, this is the offer I got. At least, listen, I'm willing to be miserable and make more money or have better perks, flexibility, or you can pay me more. And some of these companies will up the ante and actually honor that. So depending on how ballsy you are with it and your comfort level, there's different ways you can kind of approach it. But there's also a beauty in being uncomfortable. And here we are today,
Yeah, I remember going to, and I've said this before, so I apologize if you guys have all heard this before, but at a Wire exec conference, there was a presenter a few years back that said she had on her screen that a comfort zone is a beautiful garden, but nothing ever grows there. And I love that. I remind myself of that when I'm being asked to do something that maybe is unfamiliar or new to me, or puts me, you know, in a place where I feel like I'm not a master at that, and I don't have expertise in that. So now I've got to move into this space, and you just have to really lean in and take risks. And remember that you are your greatest advocate. So if you're not advocating for yourself, no one else will. I think that's really important to keep in mind. Will, what are your thoughts? I know we're kind of getting close to time here. You want to share with us, you know, any advice that you have for people that might be feeling like they want to make a change, and what they should be thinking about as they navigate that future state? Oh, you're on mute, bud. You were that guy. You did.
I will
for someone to do it.
And that is the secret to happiness.
Oh no!
No, I'm going to build on Sequoyah, what she said. I think it was pretty amazing. I look at things through a very scientific perspective. That's the world I live in. And not surprisingly, Harvard Business Review has talked about this. And it talks about basically, are you going to make the choice to jump or not? And it basically tells you there's 4 things you should be doing and asking yourself. And you better answer these questions yourself. And like Sequoyah, you said, live in it. And the idea was one, does your job or employer enable you to be the best version of yourself? 2, how well does your job or employer align with your values and interests? 3rd, what does your future look like in your job or organization? And 4th, what is burnout costing you? This is a little bit focused on burnout. The idea would be if you can't answer those questions, and I don't think you're in the position where you should be taking any jump, because all you can do is jump into something that's worse. And I'm telling you, when Melissa calls me up, she almost makes me want to I want to sell my companies and go work for somebody else, because they tell you lots of great things. It's not until you're in the culture, you're like, I'm not a fit. That may be 6 months until you realize this isn't the right place for me. So you better have those questions answered. And then you owe it to yourself to answer or have those questions answered in an interview. That's what you should be doing. Or what does my best self look like in your organization? Here's what I think is my best self. And if they can't answer that, that's probably not the right choice for you.
Mm-hmm. Great advice. Melissa, any closing words to share before we head out? Oh, you're on mute too. That mute monster gets you.
No, I think Sequoyah was spot on. I think you need to have that meeting with your manager. You have to do it. Lisa, like you said, if you're not going to advocate for yourself, there's not a single other person that will advocate for you. So you have to have that conversation. You have to have that courage to do it. You need to be prepared. You can't just go in there. And I mean, I've seen this often in my career. People just come in there and they say, I want more. More what and why? You need to go in there and answer those questions. More what and why? And ultimately, I think that is the starting point. Too often in my career, I see the people that deserve the promotion the most, deserve the money the most, the titles the most, are quiet. And I think human nature is unfortunately not geared towards the quiet. Most managers are going to be distracted by the person that makes noise. And I'm not saying that that's how it should be. I'm just saying that that's how typically it is. And so you have to have that conversation. You have to advocate for yourself. The only thing that I would really encourage you to do is be prepared. Be prepared for that conversation. Have the facts, have the data, have the examples, have the vision for yourself of what that next step looks like, versus just having kind of a less confident, hey, I want to talk to you about being unhappy and wanting more. That to a hiring manager just means very little. So come in there prepared, like you're almost prepared to pitch yourself and yourself as a product and as a value to that organization. But yeah, I mean, what Sequoyah said is spot on. I can't say that better myself.
Yeah, no, excellent advice from all 3 of you guys. Thank you so much. Lilah, I don't know if you want to come back on video and if you have any comments or things to share as we wrap up, and then we'll hand it over to Amanda to close us out.
Yeah, it was so great listening and watching this conversation. And I would just emphasize that again, that the empathy, employers need to have empathy, of course, but employees need to communicate and advocate for themselves to have that change.
Well said. Well said. So Amanda, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you guys so much. This has been an awesome panel, and Lilah and team, thank you guys so much for formulating the deck. Hand it to you, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Lisa. And thanks to Will and Melissa and Sequoyah and Lilah. This was so great. And it was so great to see the audience really sort of shouting your praise about really providing people with tangible takeaways of things that they can apply real time, real day. So that was really, really awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. Again, we hope to see everyone in person in Nashville this November. Lots of conversations around current state of talent, job market, changing skill set, all of that. So hope to see everyone there. Thanks again for participating. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.